Through the chair, the meeting is live.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Councillor Christine Michaud. I'll be chairing this meeting along with Councillor John Gazzola. At this time, I'm just going to explain the reasons for the hearing, under what authority, and the process is to be followed. This meeting of the Licensing Tribunal is being called resume consideration of appeal number 2021-01 to hear the submissions to determine whether or not to revoke a lodging house license to Ann Hamilton operating at 249 Duke Street East, Kitchener, Ontario, pursuant to Chapter 553 Lodging House of the City of Municipal Code, Kitchener Municipal Code. As a summary from the previous hearing date on July 15th, the day concluded with receipt of additional evidence from Mr. Ellis on behalf of the respondent, which include the following: business license renewal notice, bylaws at home, City of Kitchener noise bylaw, denial of adjournment from council from city, email correspondence between Ann and Timothy Ellis and Helen Philacto, email correspondence between us and the City Council, house rules and needle boxes, Human Rights Code, RSO 1990-CH, Residential Tenancies Act 2006, SO 2006C, statement from Eric Schmidt from Assertive Community Treatment Team, statement from Brian Emmons, and 249 Duke Street East Lodging House first notice about license, which we accepted this into evidence at the tribunal. Was of the opinion the evidence was not prejudicial to the case of the city, as the documents submitted were either A, publicly available in the case of the Residential Tenancies Act, the Human Rights Code, and the city's own noise bylaw, B, already in the possession of the city in the case of the correspondence and notices, or C, previously testified to in the case of the images and statements. The Licensing Tribunal, under the authority of the Municipal Act 2001, has the following options to recommend to council in respect to the lodging house license: the applicant be granted the license, or granting the license with conditions, or suspending the license, or denying the license. Prior to concluding the hearing, both sides will be asked to provide summations, either orally or in writing, at the direction of the committee, after which the committee members will adjourn to discuss submissions with either A, reserve its decision, or B, render a decision orally. The tribunal shall, as soon as practicable, make a written report to City Council summarizing the evidence and arguments presented, the findings and facts made by the tribunal, and the recommendations, if any, with reasons to be considered by council. Please be advised that the hearing shall be open to the public except where the tribunal is of that matters involving public security may be disclosed, or intimate financial or personal matters or other matters may be disclosed at the hearing of such a nature. Having regard to the circumstances that the desirability of avoiding disclosure thereof in the interest of any person affected or in the public interest outweighs the desirability of adhering to the principle that hearings be open to the public. I'd like to resume this session now by asking Mr. Ellis to call his final witness.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ellis. If it's okay, if we can affirm Annan, that would be great, just before you get started.
Sounds good.
Wonderful. Would you mind raising your hand? Do you swear affirm the information you're going to provide is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you so much. Just keep in mind, you are a little bit far away, so we couldn't quite hear you. So just for testifying purposes, if the committee can't hear you, they may let you know.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. My camera just shut off. There we go. Sorry.
Do you mind affirming just one more time to make sure we can hear you?
Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
All right.
Okay. I'm going to try and make this as brief as possible so that we don't take up too much of everybody's time. So Ann, you purchased this property at 249 Duke Street East?
I did.
And what was the function of the property?
To house people.
Did you apply for a lodging license after you purchased the property?
I did not.
Why did you not apply for the license when you first bought the property?
It needed major renovations and those needed to be done. And to do that, it was not going to be occupied by as many people as would have a rooming house license would have required.
When did you apply for the rooming house license, the lodging license?
I believe it was October 2018.
Was this after the city attended at your property?
I believe so.
And did the city put any conditions on your license?
No, they did not.
And was the property inspected by city inspectors?
It was inspected by the fire department and property standards.
And did it pass these inspections?
It passed them in 2019.
Okay. Have you had inspections since then? Did you have to do
Yes, I
inspections?
just finished an inspection with the fire department last week.
Okay, and did it pass?
Yes,
And you heard that there's some house rule. Were you aware that you needed to put up house rules?
there was no requirement to put up house rules. I was not made aware that that was necessary
Sorry.
until a letter I received from Helen Flactu, I believe in 2021, to be very late, either December or January 2021. However, was proactive and I had the house rules posted shortly after finishing renovations and finishing the painting.
Would we be able to put up the house rules?
We can. We're just obtaining that record.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you recognize this picture?
Yes,
And who took this picture?
I did
And how long have these house rules been up?
for years. That one is in the window. That one was probably put up 2016, maybe 2017. I'm not 100% sure, but it's been up for a long time. If you were to look at the Google Maps pictures of the house back then, you saw that at the front view of the house.
Was this up before or after you applied for the
It was
lodging license?
Up long before I applied for the rooming house license. And in fact, I believe that the inspectors mentioned that it was there.
Did you put needle disposal boxes in this property?
I did, but not until January 2021. And that's because up until then, I did not have any active intravenous drug users in the property.
Okay. Do you have the ability to enforce these house rules?
Unfortunately, I do not,
And why is that?
because the Human Rights Code and the Residential Tenancy Act, both of them overrule me. Tenant behind closed doors is allowed to do anything and everything that he does, so long as it doesn't interfere with the reasonable enjoyment of the other tenants.
Did the city require you to put the needle boxes in?
They asked for them. I saw no reason not to.
Okay.
They're definitely something that are necessary.
Did this representative of the city explain why they required the?
She did not.
So the city was aware that there was drug problems in the area?
I'm going to assume so.
You explained that when you purchased the property, that it needed extensive renovations.
Correct.
And what was the condition of the property when you bought it?
The property still was wired with knob and tube. The windows were wooden and were letting a lot of air in. Some of them were broken. The eaves soffits, fascia and downspouting, some were missing, some were damaged. The rooms were, some of the flooring was not not appropriate. And it just didn't have a lot of lighting. It was quite dingy inside.
What were the tenants like when you first purchased the property?
There were 4 men. One of them had basically turned the back door into a revolving door, letting people in. They were sleeping in the hallways, in the basement. There were bikes being brought in, garbage all over the property. women and men coming at all hours of the day of night, screaming, yelling, loud music. It was chaos.
Did you take any action with respect to these problems?
I moved in and assessed the situation immediately, got rid of the gentleman who made my back door the revolving door. And then I was down to 3 tenants and I watched them. And again, they were attracting the wrong kind of company. I was able to talk one of them into moving voluntarily. The second one with headbutting and threats on both sides and police calling I was able to get him out. However, when a tenant moved in afterwards, he came back. And again, it started all over again. And there was nothing I could do because now he's no longer a tenant. And the Residential Tenancy Act will help me in some of this stuff here, but guests aren't included in the Residential Tenancy Act. It's just a position that, like, my hands are tied.
When you wish to evict a tenant, what do you have to do?
I have to apply to the Residential Tenancy Act, but in the meantime, I have to serve them paperwork. First, it includes verbal warnings, second, written, and then I go through the procedures. I have to appear in front of the tribunal. I have to wait for a ruling. When that ruling comes, and if it's in my favor, then I apply to the sheriff, and the sheriff evicts. I do not have the power to evict.
Have you taken these steps in the past?
I have multiple times.
When the pandemic arrived, did this present a problem for you with your tenants?
Yes. I felt that the provincial government threw me under the bus by telling tenants they don't have to pay the rent and then slapping down an eviction moratorium. So for 5.5 months, the landlord tenant board was shut down, which means we didn't even get a hearing. And then when it resumed, there was such a backlog that cases were taking 6 to 7 to 10 months before we even got in front of a adjudicator and got a hearing.
What problems have arose and why do you think that, or you just explained that, never mind. Were you able to, did the city contact you during this period of the rent or the eviction freeze?
Yes, they did.
And
I think they wanted me to do things with a snap of a finger, and that was not in my power. Not without I guess, not unless I disregarded their human rights and their rights under the Residential Tenancy Act. But I would have left myself wide open to lawsuits as well as even criminal charges.
so over the time that you've had the property, what problems have they indicated that are going on in the premise? Like the trailer, for instance, was someone living in the trailer?
Nobody was living in the trailer.
And what happened with the trailer?
The trailer ended up in the dump.
And when there was a problem with the fence, how did you deal with that?
I was hoping that the city would relent on that. The fence was solid. What had happened was that there were trees that had grown around the fence, which made it wonky. But the fence was solid. It wasn't going anywhere. If you pushed on the fence, it wasn't going anywhere. It was my hope, because I had taken down the trees in 2016, that they would relent and realize that the fence was solid. It wasn't at risk of falling down and hurting anybody, that they would let me continue with the fence and then straighten it out at another point in time. They wanted this all done during the pandemic.
Did you deal with the fence?
I took it down.
Okay. How does the city correspond with you?
I get emails, I get letters, I get phone calls.
And where do you live right now?
I live at 42 Honer Ave, which is maybe a 3.5-4 block walk from 249 Duke Street.
So you don't live at 249 Duke Street?
Not at this time, no.
Do they have your accurate contact information?
I believe they do now.
Okay. Did they not before?
I when I bought the property, I lived at 31 Andrew Street. I moved out of there, moved into 249 Duke Street. I was there for about a year, give or take, maybe a year and a half. But I'd still kept 31 Andrew Street as my mailing address. Then I got some renovators in to fix it up and sell it. And I ended up actually disposing of it, I believe, in July 2019. But for a while there, I was not in residence there. And in fact, the house was not occupied. It was being renovated.
So let's talk about the tenants that you've had at 249 Duke Street East. How have the tenants been? Have you had some good tenants there?
The original one, Brian Amons, who you've heard from, he's been there for 19 years. I inherited him. He's wonderful, single man, never married.
Through the chair, I apologize just for concerns with privacy. If we could just avoid using tenant names.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
I just wanted to stop you in case you wanted to proceed in that fashion.
No.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Rooms 2 and 4 are occupied by tenants that have been there over 5 years. Room 3, he's been there a little over a year. He's put up with some of the crap that we've had to put up with, especially in the last year and a half since COVID happened. He's been very good, very nice about it. Room 5 is currently vacant. Room 6, the gentleman that was in there originally and had been there for years passed away in October 2020. And it was re-rented in December. That person was, he left voluntarily end of January because it wasn't working. And that was because of the dog. And it's a dog, one dog. And unit 7, I had a long-term tenant in there. He has since moved, but would love to be able to come back. I had to put another tenant in there. It was supposed to be a temporary measure, but so far she likes it and may stay. I'm not 100% sure yet because, as I said, everything's kind of up in the air.
Why is room 5 vacant?
Room 5 is vacant because I evicted the problem tenant.
And how long did it take you to evict the problem tenant?
I served the first set of paperwork, I believe within 2.5 months after she moved in, but the adjudicator at the tribunal thought she deserved another chance and gave it to her. So she was in compliance for quite some time. And then when COVID hit, her best friend died April 2020, and she went haywire. And her addiction fed her choices and decisions. I could not reason with her. I could not speak to her. It got to a point where there was an actual physical altercation between her and I. All communication broke down, and all I could do at that point in time was to wait for the tribunal to open up again, which it did in August. I served the paperwork, and we proceeded to get a court date finally in March of 2021. But from April 2020, maybe May or June, until April 2021, there was no control there. There was nothing I could do. My hands were tied. It was so bad. The whole house was toxic.
When were you able to finally evict?
I got my court date in March 2021. I got the order in April 2021. I immediately went to the sheriff's as soon as I can, paid my $375 fee, but I had to wait until the moratorium was lifted June 2nd of 2021. On June 3rd, 2021, I got a call from the sheriff who said, I'm coming in June 25th to evict. And I'm like, thank God. But I had nothing, there was nothing I could do up until that time.
Could we bring up the document that's called delivery of vacant possession? Do you recognize this document?
I do.
And what is this document?
This is the document that is, I was handed a copy, another copy was taped onto the door of room 5 when I got vacant possession.
And this document is from who?
This is from the sheriff.
Okay. So after you got vacant possession, it appears, what's the date for vacant possession?
June 25th, 2021.
Since you've had vacant possession, have you had any problems at 249 Duke Street?
Absolutely not.
And you just haven't found the right person to put in as of this point?
I found the right person. I just can't act on it until I know where this property stands
Based on this hearing?
based on this hearing.
Okay. So did you get notice about this hearing for the licensing renewal?
I believe I did in March or April or May. Like, it was really late and I had very little time to prepare.
Okay. And before that, did you know that there were going to be this hearing?
Helen had sent me a letter saying that she was recommending that my license be pulled. There was no discussion. It was, this is the way it's going to be.
So there was no real discussions between that and the hearing?
I sent her a letter trying to explain to her how my hands were tied, and all I got was nothing. It's just, we're going to proceed with this. I mean, we don't really care.
Sorry. You've seen and heard the allegations and the problems alleged against your premises.
I have.
And could you tell us about the efforts you've put in to try and correct all of the allegations that have come about the premises?
I have tried everything to make that place a beautiful place to live. So physically, the things that I can change, the property, I have done. The people. There are times when people are absolutely great, when they're in a good space, and because of that, they make the space around them good. And then there are factors that happen that changes people. And when people changes, the environment around them changes. And of that, I have no control.
You've heard the allegations alleged against you that you're an absentee landlord.
I've heard them. It's crazy.
How often are you at the premises?
There are times when I'm there every single day. I mean, when I live there, now 3 to 4 times a week, I go there with my red truck. I pick up the garbage because I don't want rats coming from the supermarket behind there. I often check in with the one tenant that is a intravenous drug user to make sure that she's okay, that she's alive, because I really have a concern that she's not long for this world. I talk to my people often, and I have a handyman also when I'm not there who is there. I have given a cell phone to Carl, the tenant in room number 4. To contact me if there's any concerns. And he's had that phone since, I believe, 2017. And I pay for it. So there is a phone on premises should anybody need to call me. And of course, he has my number. And my phone number is on the bottom of that rule sheet as well. So I'm not difficult to find or call.
So could you tell us about the status of the tenants that caused these problems, such as, could you tell us about the noise issue and what you've done about the noise complaint issues?
The dog, that was the noise. I spoke to the gentleman in that room and we moved him to another property in the beginning of February 2021. So that problem was December, January. I took care of it as best as I could. And I think I did a pretty good job. I don't know if there were any complaints after that. I did not hear of any.
Could you tell us about the police attendances and what you've done about those?
There's been many times when I've called the police to remove trespassers, but have been told by the police that if those trespassers, those undesirables, are in a tenant's room, I can do nothing, they can do nothing. we don't have that power. Once they're in a room, they're considered guests, and I don't have any right to trespass them, and the police have no right to remove them.
Can we talk about the police attendance the February of this year?
February 18th. The police came. I was taking out the garbage. It was Thursday, and all of a sudden they were just everywhere. And two of them ran past me to the backyard, and I looked at them and they said, "Don't move," which obviously I wasn't going to move. And they went to the back, and then they came back out later. I heard a boom, and I was not able to go into the house while they were there. But there was, and I counted 21 of them outside. I kind of lost count because it was hard to keep track of them. They were moving here, there, and everywhere. And so I didn't see the ones that were inside. But they took out a gentleman who was a former tenant. He had moved out in late January. He was the owner of the dog. And another woman who I might have seen around, but I did not know her name, and I had not had any sort of lengthy conversation with her. All I know is that she was pregnant.
Was she a tenant?
No, I didn't know her.
Do you know why they were in your building?
They handed me the warrant, and the warrant said that they were going in looking for guns, ammunition, an electroconductive energy weapon, which I've been told is a taser, and bear spray. There was nothing on the warrant that asked or even mentioned drugs.
Do you have any knowledge of any of your tenants being charged in respect to any noise bylaw or complaints that have been made?
No. I know I haven't been.
So you would say that you've taken whatever steps that you could in order to deal with any problems that were brought to your attention?
If I know about it, I deal with it. If I don't know about it, I can't.
Can you tell us the services and benefits that your land and premises provide to the community?
Safe, affordable housing. I work with my tenants within the budget. I go a little bit above and beyond what a lot of rooming house landlords do. Besides providing internet free of charge, or is included in your rent, I also provide cleaning supplies, garbage bags, toilet paper, things that a lot of people on a limited budget can't afford. And these are the things that they usually don't buy when they're given the choice of buying food or supplies that they need for their own self. I also sometimes pick up resources from the community: toothpaste, toothbrushes, deodorants, body washes, things like that, and I drop them off in the bathrooms of the property.
What do you feel would happen if your premises was not available as housing for your tenants?
I don't want to think about that. I'm going to use an example. I'm going to use 374 Louisa Street, which was the property that was closed down by the city a couple years ago. There were 7 legal tenants and there were a bunch of occupants. One of them was dead within 60 days. He died on King Street asking for help. It was quite sad. 4 of them are now in Tent City, which used to be on lot 42. One of them, I know his name, he's still on the streets. He's house surfing. The other one I housed briefly for a number of months, and because of her health issues was no longer able to, and she is now in a facility that's more geared to the palliative care that she needs. And the other one I don't know.
With your knowledge of the eviction process and the present state of applications, could your tenants be evicted immediately if your license was to not be renewed?
Not by law, not by any law here. If I were to say you're on the streets today, the Residential Tenancy Act, they would be able to sue me. No, I couldn't do that.
From your experience, how long would it take to go through the process at this time to obtain an eviction order?
I hear that it's taking about 4 months to get a court date. And if the tenant asks for an extension, a reasonable extension, the tribunal grants that to them. And they can ask for 60, 90, 120 days, even 6 months. And the tribunal will grant that to them because the tribunal is very pro-tenant. And so it could take a year, maybe.
So to review, have you done everything required by the city to maintain your license?
I have.
You responded to communication from the city in respect to requirements and complaints, correct?
Correct.
You've attempted to deal with the complaints within the confines of the law?
I have.
Is there anything else you would like this tribunal to know in relation to your lodging license?
I work with the Mental Health Association. I'm not an employee by any means. I am a housing provider, and I help them with people in transition and have done this many, many times. I enjoy what I do. I don't have to work within the confines of the organization because I'm not a member of the organization, but I get the job done quickly. I'm one of the few people that can actually walk with a friend downtown and see somebody pushing a shopping cart with all their worldly possessions in it. And I don't have to turn to my friend and say, listen, somebody should do something about that. I'm somebody that will turn to my friend and say, hey, listen, why don't we go do something about that? And then we go talk to them. I am in a position where I can take somebody off the streets literally in minutes and put them in a house.
Are you aware whether or not any of your tenants have mental health issues?
Every single one of them does. Even my neighbors do. COVID has not brought out the best in people.
Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Okay, we'll bring. Sorry, just get my. Okay, Erin Mug, do you care to question now?
Yes, I have to cross-examine. I have some questions. Hello, Ms. Tamber. First of all, you just made some statements about 274 Louisa Street.
374 Louisa Street.
Yeah, that's right, right? That's what you said. So did you own that property?
I did not.
Okay. So how do you have knowledge about all these things that you were saying about that property?
I've been there. I knew the people. They asked me for help when they knew they were getting evicted.
Okay, so let's talk about your property. This is 249 Duke Street East that you own, right?
Right.
Okay. So why didn't you get a license when you bought it in 2015?
The renovations were going to take a substantial amount of time. So it was less than the required amount of tenants. Plus I was living there. So it wasn't required.
Who else was living there at the time?
You want
You
names?
don't have to state their names, but how many other people were living there at the time?
Rooms 1, rooms 3, rooms 1, rooms 5 and 6.
Rooms 1, 3, 5, and 6?
No, not 3. Rooms 1, 5, and 6.
Okay. So you heard the testimony earlier on a previous day from the licensing inspector. Her name is Julie. When the licensing inspector was trying to get a hold of you about getting a license, did you ever mention to Julie that you lived there at 249 Duke Street East?
I didn't see her, so I didn't have any conversation with her at all.
Okay, so you also mentioned that you had this other mailing address, so all your mail was going to this other address?
Until I sold it. I think there's probably still mail going to it. But 31 Andrew Street was the address that I owned and lived at when I bought the property in December 2015. So correspondence may have gone to that address that I never received.
So how long did you live within 249 Duke Street East?
Over a year. I'm not exactly 100% sure when I left.
Okay.
I was in room 2, the basement room, and I also was in room 5 for at least a summer and part of a fall.
So could you receive mail at that address as well?
249 Duke Street East.
Yeah, could you receive mail there?
I could have, yes.
Okay. I was just wondering why you didn't tell the licensing inspector that you live there so she could mail you or contact you.
Probably because I didn't meet her. It's very difficult to tell people things if you don't meet them.
So do you have a designated person who lives at the property to check in for you now that you don't live there?
Not a designated person that lives there. There's me. I have a tenant that I've given a cell phone to and has been using it for years. And that would have happened after I moved out.
Okay. Now, you've been provided with a copy of the City of Kitchener's Municipal Code, Chapter 553. This would be through your agent, Mr. Ellis. It's the lodging house bylaw, and I'd just like to direct your attention to the section that says so it's 553.2.17. It says that every person holding a lodging house license shall ensure that there is an on-site person responsible for the day-to-day operations of the lodging house, and that the manager of licensing is provided with the contact information for this person. So have you done that?
No.
Let's talk about what you do when you rent to tenants. Do you have a procedure that you do?
No. I asked some questions. A lot of people don't want to open up initially, and I understand that completely. But I meet a lot of people, I observe a lot of people, and through that, I know definitely who I'm not going to rent to. But there will be people that will plead to me, and I will give some people a chance, hoping that it works out for them, for me, for my other tenants.
Do you have a contract that you provide?
Initially, I did contracts, but now they don't hold up. I can't even give that to them.
Okay, well, it's just that we heard from Officer Rick Potvin that that there was some short-term 15-day contracts. So do you do that still?
I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, you had talked to some tenants, and he said that in his evidence that there were some short-term, the tenants told him, yeah, I have a 15-day contract. So do you do that?
I am not familiar at all of what you're talking about. So this is news to me.
Okay, so there's no paperwork then that anybody fills out for you?
Now that we have to fill out the residential tenancy template that's 13 pages, but that wasn't required until 2017.
18.
Or 2018, somewhere around there.
So there's no content of any contract. You're just relying on some template from the Residential Tenancies
That's what we
Act.
have to do. In fact, it's the law.
So did you ever talk to your tenants about subletting?
No,
No, so you've never put it to a tenant that you shouldn't rent to another without you knowing about it?
I don't have that right.
Okay. So you don't have any clauses, obviously, about guests or other people attending?
I can't under the Residential Tenancy Act.
But you do have some house rules.
I have house rules that cannot be enforced, unfortunately.
Okay. So in those house rules that Mr. Ellis put up earlier, it talks about guests. It talks about how they're required to get permission So who do they get permission from?
I would like to know in the event that there's ever a fire, because if there's a fire and the fire department knows there's 7 people, they're gonna pull out 7 bodies. If you happen to be the 8th person and you're the legal tenant, you're not gonna get rescued. And I explain that to them when they rent.
Okay.
That's why I want to know who the guests are. Or that they are current or present.
Okay, so that's something that you added to the house rules about the permission?
Those house rules have been posted for years. But in 2017, I had a problem tenant and she was bringing in guests that were undesirable, that upset the house. And I posted some extra notes up on the property asking that we not have people sleeping over or being in present after 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock on weekends. But I could not enforce it.
You mentioned earlier too that you said that something about your tenants having reasonable enjoyment of the property.
Correct. So if somebody's playing music at 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody has to go to work at 6 o'clock, that is interfering with that. Bylaw can be called, bylaw can lay a charge. I can't do anything about it, but I can call bylaw, and bylaw, that is their job to lay the charge and hopefully stop this. And with bylaws cooperation, I can start with the paperwork in N5 and move towards eviction.
So when you speak about reasonable enjoyment, you're not talking about drugs or anything else. You're just talking about noise.
That's an example that we use. Drug use. Hard to say that drug use in one room is going to interfere with the reasonable enjoyment of a tenant in another room or on a different floor, unless it spills out into the common areas and or people banging on his or her door at odd hours. So that's a tough one. And my tenants complained about the traffic. I did what I could in respect to evicting the problem tenants and was successful, but unfortunately not in the timely manner that I would have really preferred to have been able to work with.
So the rules haven't changed. They've been up there for a while and they haven't changed since 2019 or 2017 or they just haven't changed. They've been up there. Okay.
Right.
And do you have any other rules other than the house rules?
Not posted. I try not to make rules up as I go along. But again, I have to follow the Residential Tenancy Act. Those rules are quite well posted and they're on any government website. Unfortunately, the Residential Tenancy Act seems to change every 6 months or so, but I try to follow it to the letter of the law as best I can.
So when you lived at the property and there were a few other people who were also residing in a few rooms, how did you manage guests at that time?
If they left property in the common areas, I removed it. If they disturbed me, I would call the police. But again, I was handcuffed by the fact that if they're in a private room, that the police cannot do anything about it. What they can do is make notes of who's hanging around. And if, and so many times, there were warrants for these people, then they would be able to remove them.
Did you ever keep a log of visitors?
I did not.
And okay. So what do you think you're responsible for as a landlord?
As a housing provider, I'm responsible for the well-being of my tenants, obviously property standards, that they have safe housing, and that they, as many amenities as I can provide, that I do so properly in a timely manner and efficiently. Like, for example, when the internet goes down, it's my responsibility to get that up and running so these people have a way of communicating as fast as I can. And I do that. I find myself putting out a lot of fires at my property. That's literally not figurative, or figuratively, not literally. But if the cable box goes down, I'm the one that has to replace it. If the internet starts getting wonky, I'm the one that gets the call. If we're out of toilet paper, I got to make sure there's toilet paper there. If one tenant is annoying another, I got to go and mediate. If somebody's not keeping their kitchen clean, I have to talk to them. So.
Okay. You read in your witness statement to the committee, and I'm just going to put this to you. At the very end of your witness statement, you said that with these licensing requirements, you have to make sure that your house conforms with the safety codes, with working smoke alarms and property standards. It gives me a reason to visit frequently and to oversee that nothing's tampered with. So my question to you from that is, do you think that these laws don't apply to you if you don't have a license?
I think that it'll be less likely that they'd be enforced. And I do have tenants with a lot of mental health issues. From experience, I will tell you that they don't feel that the rules apply to them, and they will argue ad nauseum that they don't like the alarm system, or that there's a microphone in there or a camera in there that's watching them. And as a result, they tamper them, they take them down, they rip them apart to look for this camera, this microphone.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that you go a lot to the property, and so there was a tenant who died at this property, and we don't need to talk about the personal information regarding that person, but if you're there as much as you say you are, then how did you not know that this person was subletting? I mean, you mentioned it in your witness statement, that's why I bring it up.
They weren't there the day before.
So when did you find out that they were subletting?
When the tenant called me and said she's passed, and this woman was on the stairs, and she at that point in time informed me that she felt that she had the right to stay because she had paid this girl for half a month's rent. And I'm like, really? And I said to the police officer, the female police officer there, I said, you tell her what her rights are. I walked away. I had to deal with the other tenant who was very upset with the whole situation. I had no idea this had happened. And I don't believe her for a minute that she ever gave that girl any money.
So you stated that the residents at your property, the tenants, they have a communal phone to call you when needed.
I didn't say that. I said one of the tenants has a phone, but
Oh,
yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. I
he
thought
has
you
a cell
provided
phone.
like a house phone so that people could call you.
No, he has a cell phone, and he's there most of the time, not so much in the mornings. Usually he's gone. I think he does his walk about from 7, 8 o'clock till about 10:30, 11, and he might go out, step out. But for the most part, he's probably there at least 20 hours of the day.
Okay. So you stated that you made a lot of police calls.
I've made them, yes.
Yeah, about removing trespassers.
Right.
So how did you know that there are people trespassing at the property if nobody can call you, or if one person's limited to calling you?
When the trespassers were coming in, I live there. So they come in, they bring their bikes, they bring their knapsacks, they bring their trailers, they bring their sleeping bags, and I would tell them to leave. And if they didn't leave, which a lot of them didn't, I would call the police. If they're in the bedroom of a prospective tenant, there was nothing I could do, but I could remove the property that they left that impeded the safe exit through the house. Like, for example, they put bikes near a stairway or near an exit.
So how do tenants contact you if they need something fixed?
Call me, email me. I'm on Facebook. I I usually find out because I'm able to solve their issue within hours. I also have a handyman as well that I can call that can help as well.
And going back to the numbers of calls to the police, did you keep a log about how many times you called the police?
I did not. A lot of the times the phone calls never went through, so I never actually had to speak to an officer. Usually it was dispatch, and I would always call for the downtown precinct. And usually by then they realized that I meant business and they left, the people that were there without being invited by one of the other tenants.
So we heard in other evidence through the manager of licensing that there were 77 calls for service.
I understand that one, but that's also the same number they gave for 374 Louisa Street. So I'm kind of confused as to whether or not that was for me.
No,
or for
that's incorrect. I'm sorry. The one for Louisa Street was only 49.
Okay.
So that's incorrect. And again, I really would appreciate you not speaking about Louisa Street. Because we've sort of agreed that we're talking about your property, right? Let's move on then to talking about evicting. You spoke a bit about evicting tenants. When you said you moved in, you had this revolving door tenant. How did you get rid of them so quickly?
The police helped me remove him. Because I lived there, it was no longer under the Landlord Tenant Act.
You evicted a tenant recently in June 2021.
Correct.
And how many attempts did you make to evict that person?
Twice. The first time the tribunal ruled against me in her favor. The second time she didn't show up and I was able to get a default judgment.
What was the reason for evicting?
First time, non-payment of rent. The second time, non-payment of rent.
Okay. Have you had any success at remedying issues regarding tenants?
Many times.
Can you give an example?
I had two tenants that were constantly clashing. A male tenant who would make lewd comments as to what was going on in the bedroom of the other tenant. And I said, listen, what happens behind closed doors between two consenting adults is none of your business. I don't ask what you do with your Karen, so therefore you have no right to even speculate or at least verbalize what you believe is going on between her and her friends. So he agreed. He kind of got a little bit quieter about it, and they lived in harmony for about 6 months until he left.
Okay. Have you done anything related to helping tenants in other ways?
I've helped tenants get into palliative care. Conversely, I have helped Freeport. They will call me up when they have somebody that they're ready to discharge into the community and this person has no shelter and a place to go. And they will call me and I will house this person, and I can house them usually within 24 to 48 hours, either through myself or through the network of other landlords that I work with. And I think that's, it's really very satisfying to be able to give them a room, whereas preventing them to having to go into the shelter area, which I'm sure is not going to help their recovery.
Do you ever move tenants to other properties that you own?
I do.
Okay, and why would you do that?
They need more amenities, or they're closer to me because I can help a lot more than say other ones of my tenants. Also because of pets, I will move people. I have properties that are, I would say, more animal friendly with fenced in backyards.
Okay. Did you know that there's drugs on the property or people using drugs on the property?
I know that there's drugs pretty well at every single property in KW that you have rentals. I can't think of an apartment building that doesn't have drugs. Before that February 18th attendance at my property, I saw the same squad, multiple police, going into the Queen Margaret buildings on the corner of Margaret and Queen Street. Maybe an hour and a half before they came to 249 Duke Street.
So you mentioned though in your witness statement, and you've told us, I think again today, that you know that there's an intravenous drug user on the property.
Yes, I placed her in there myself.
Right. And Mr. Ellis asked you about when you provided a needle disposal.
When she moved in.
Right.
I didn't have any intravenous drug users in before then.
Okay. When did she move in?
January 2021. She was living in my house. We moved her there because I had to move another tenant out of that. So they changed rooms.
Okay. You had a lot to say about COVID happening within your witness statement when you read that out for the committee on the last hearing date. What would you like to say about that today? Would you like to say anything about COVID and CERB today?
I think the government acted very quickly by distributing money. I will say that a lot of people that took COVID money were not entitled to it. And because they took COVID money, their other programs were cut, either their ODSP or their social assistance. A lot of them had set up rent landlord direct, obviously being cut off. The landlords didn't get paid. We had the provincial government also adding and exasperating that, including closing down the tribunals. I'm going to tell you that COVID affected a lot of people's mental health. I will even say that mine has. I lost a lot of people during COVID. I had 2 people close to me die in October, 2 more people die in February, and my business partner, who was only 48, died in the hospital, in the emergency room bathroom at Grand River Hospital in January of 2021. I know that this has happened to me. COVID was an unknown. People didn't know if they were going to live or die. People didn't know who had it. And the stores closed down. Support groups closed down. Counselors weren't seeing people. My daughter, for example, was in a car accident in July of 2020. And the driver didn't survive. She watched her take her last breaths. My daughter is a wreck. And she can't see a counselor because counselors aren't seeing people. And I'm dealing with a child that just starts crying and has night terrors. And she's 20 something. I have a granddaughter who is her daughter. And it has affected me. And if it's affected me, it definitely has affected all the other people who are cooped up in their houses, not able to go out, not able to breathe, not able to socialize with their supports. I want to tell you right now, 249 Duke Street in some ways became like a jail to these people because they could not go to the places where they used to go for their food, their communal meals, for it just changed everything. And it's never going to be the same. Even now, they're talking about a 4th wave. There is no end to this. It's changed people, and there's the fallout. I can quote you some quotes about people with mental health issues and how 25% of the population is going to experience at some point in time in their life. Some of these people, they have good days and bad weeks, sometimes good weeks, bad days. I can relate to that now because of what my experiences are. And people that also self-medicate will definitely be affected. And right now, the medication that's out there, if we call it medicine, is tainted with crap. and people are dying. With the pandemic and the people dying from COVID, there's also the pandemic of people dying from addictions and overdoses. All of this here affects my people. It affects outside, it affects inside, it affects families. It's changed us. This is not the same world.
So obviously there's a lot of stress. Do you provide any agencies to help? Do any agencies come in as a support for your tenants?
Most of my tenants come in with a worker support. It's the worker that contacts me, not always, but mostly. When somebody has come to me personally and asked me, I will refer them to a worker who can work with them. But I take a lot of this on myself as well. I listen, I talk to people. I would like to be able to hold meetings like I used to since before COVID, where a bunch of us go together and we just release, we go to the park, we have a barbecue in the backyard. I don't get to do that like I used to, where we share a communal meal. And COVID has changed things. And we don't have that now. I used to have, there was a fire pit in the back of 249 Duke Street until one of the neighbors complained about it. But they would get together and they would cook a little bit of food and, maybe have a little bit to drink and talk. And we don't have that anymore.
So what agencies do you refer people to?
There's a group out of the soup kitchen. There is, there was a group out of the House of Friendship, which they're now hosting them in a hotel in Guelph. So we don't have that anymore. Mary's Place, there were some people that had referred people to me as well. Some of the people have been promoted. Some of the people have just bowed out of the business because it's too stressful for them. So I don't have the same group that I used to have, but I mean, I could give you names.
No, just wait a second. You're saying that those agencies are referring tenants to you. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, like the Freeport Hospital, the
right. And we heard from Eric Schmidt from Thresholds Homes. But what I'm asking is, what agencies do you tell your tenants like who they can contact to give them some help, like some resources for the tenants?
Oh, well, initially it was going out of the soup kitchen because you had a bunch of support workers there, but they've changed all that now because of funding. So they're not the same people that I used to know. Like I used to know Joe and I used to know Clarence, but they're not there anymore because they've changed those systems because of COVID. So they're different people now. So I just say, go down to the soup kitchen and see what you can do. But I do have a young blonde gentleman. I've spoken to him a couple of times. I've housed a couple of people and he's asked me to. I remember going to Victoria Park and picking up this guy's tent and his possessions and moving it into one of my houses because he was sleeping just on the railroad tracks just outside Victoria Park, and taking him out of that situation. Another guy that I picked up, he was at the soup kitchen in the back, and somebody asked me if I could house him. And I said, listen, I don't have a place for you right now. I do have a room that I can give you. I'm not charging you any rent. You're just a guest. Until I can find a suitable place for you. So I put him in one of my houses waiting for another place to come up. And I ended up keeping him myself and put him in a house that I just cleared out just recently. So people just ask me because they know me. That, can you house this person? Can you help this person? So I do my best. As I said, I belong to a landlord association, no official name or anything like that, where we try to house people, but there's less and less of us because of both COVID, people aging out, and people closing down rooming houses. Like Sam, who was my friend, who owned 374 Louisa Street, he was my friend. He housed people, but he can't do it anymore.
I don't mean to interject. We just really need to try not to list anybody's names for the purpose. I know, I'm very sorry. I just really want to protect people's privacies where I'm able, okay?
I understand. I know most people by name. Yeah. I don't really know them by organization. I'm sorry.
I understand. No, that's okay. I just wanted a quick reminder as we proceed.
Not a problem. I'll do that.
Okay, so maybe we'll talk now about your tenant profile. You told the committee that your ideal tenant profile, and again, this is in your witness statement, that it's of mostly men over 40. They've been dealt a few curveballs, all the piss and vinegar gone, mostly misogynistic, that just want to drink, smoke, watch TV, and be left alone until they die.
I know.
And I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the term piss and vinegar. Can you just explain what that means?
They're guys that just want to get in a fight. They want conflict with anybody and everybody. They will take the opposing side just for the sake of taking the opposing side, even if they don't believe it. And I've had a few tenants like that. Again, it's a mental health issue, and they just they thrive on conflict. If you were married to somebody like that, believe me, you'd probably be pulling your hair out.
So are you saying that your ideal tenant profile are these types of people who have conflict?
No, I want people that avoid conflict. I don't want them to challenge anybody and everybody in front of them.
Oh.
Yeah, because if they do, it's not going to be a harmonious place to live.
Mhm.
And there are people out there that don't get along with anybody, and what I call the revolving door of jail. They're in and out, in and out. I've had tenants like that. It's been very, very difficult for both myself as well as my other tenants. I can't have that anymore. I don't know if you're aware of the Pareto principle. 20% of your efforts produce 80% of your results. Likewise, 20% of your tenants produce 80% of your problems. So the idea is to avoid that 20% that will cause me 80% of my problems, or that I find myself putting out fires at that residence over and over and over again because somebody just can't get along with people. And I can tell my tenants, ignore this person, don't try conflict, but who wants to live walking on eggshells? I know I don't.
Okay. So you have your ideal tenant profile, and you're saying that some of the issues were caused not by the men, but some other people who live there. Or
I'm not saying it one way or another, because I have very successful female tenants. In fact, 249 Duke Street, room 2 is a wonderful woman that's been there for 5 years. And I don't see her going anywhere. I have what I call lifers, and it was an expression actually given to me by another tenant who passed away in 2017, not at that property. And he said that the only way I'm leaving you and leaving your house is in a body bag. And he meant it. And it's almost the way it happened. And I said it was not anything I coined. It wasn't anything I thought about. It was actually first tenant that I ever lost. And he died in hospital. He didn't actually die in my house. But I just remember that expression and thinking, you know what, I have those people and they just want to be left alone. It's really nice to be able to work with people that have goals and have dreams. And I've had a few of those that have actually, those things have come to fruition, and they've since moved out of my houses into homes of their own, jobs of their own, into other places, like moving, across country. But not all people are like that. And in fact, I'd say 5% of the population, 1 out of 20, might be somebody that actually has a plan to make a difference in their lives and the lives of others. But most of my tenants, they don't care. They just want what they want and want to be left alone. And those are the easiest ones to house.
So maybe you could put this in perspective for us. You mentioned that there is a number of people who died at your property at 249 Duke Street East, or not at, but maybe from, and they died in hospital and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like maybe you can give like a ratio, like is that a large portion of your tenants? Like I don't know how many tenants you've had over the years from 2015. Obviously, you've stated that there's been some lifers. You mentioned that term, right? There's been a few.
Yes.
And that's like a long-term tenant.
Yeah.
So who are these other tenants? Like I just maybe just give a ratio, I guess, about the perspective of.
In the time that I've owned 249 Duke Street, 2 tenants there have died. One I evicted, and he actually was found beaten on the streets about a month and a half after I evicted him, and he died in the hospital a month later. But he wasn't technically a tenant, but he was somebody that I had to push away because of the fact that he couldn't get along with the other tenants. And I really think hard before I do an eviction, because I know what the result could be, as it was with that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just remembering something that one of your tenants, the one that testified, he mentioned a stabbing, but maybe that was prior to when you owned it.
Actually, I think he said something about somebody being hit with a beer bottle. And yes, that was before I owned the property. He would have known about that because, as I said, he'd been a tenant for 19 years. This is his home. He doesn't want to go anywhere else. He's already been evicted out of 2 of his other homes because the city has made affordable housing where he used to live, and they ripped down the houses that he lived in. He doesn't see himself going anywhere else. And I am going to do everything in my power to keep him in his home. He's been there 19 years. It's probably the stability that's kept him from I would say the rotating door of jail, because he's a very angry, aggressive person in circumstances. But because he's had the stability, he is certainly mellowed out, and he's in a wonderful place right now. Though I'm going to tell you right now, there's a lot of anger in that man right now. And I don't want to do anything to fan the flames there.
Okay, so let's move on to you work as a property manager, right? Like we saw in your house rules, you've got your number listed. You're a property manager.
I call myself a leasing agent more than a property manager, because I do more things with people than really with the properties. I kind of hire that out. I mean, I can, in a pinch, plunge a toilet. I can change an outlet. Definitely change a light bulb. Not that I do light bulbs anymore. Everything's LED now. But
so you don't consider yourself a property manager?
Well, I always consider properties the nuts and bolts of that. I do a little bit of designing. But I hire contractors to actually do the work. I want to make sure the electrical is up to code. I definitely want to make sure that the plumbing is the way it's supposed to, because the last thing I want is a leaky basement. I will get out a paintbrush and a can of paint. That I don't mind doing. I don't mind putting in a door frame, but it's more the people and making sure that their amenities are taken care of that I feel I'm better at. And of course, talking to them and talking to the organizations that are working with them to keep them healthy.
So you work during the day, is that fair to say?
Only with this. This is it. I don't have a formal job that I go to. This is my life. And there's times when I'm up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I don't get home till 10 o'clock at night.
Okay, so you work sometimes in the evenings too?
Yes, whenever I'm called.
Okay.
Or when it's too hot. I'm going through menopause right now and the heat flashes are crazy.
Okay. It's just interesting because in tab 2 of the materials provided before the committee, under conditions, number 1, there's some email correspondence between you and the manager of licensing, Helen. And in here, in this correspondence, you told Helen that you couldn't meet with or speak with her about your property because you work during the day, but not in the evenings, so that it would be better that you speak in the evenings. And obviously, Helen works during the day. So is that?
I didn't know when she was going to call me. I would have to actually map out a time where I was not going to be interrupted in order for me to speak to her. But I don't remember when that was or what I was doing at that time.
So
I have to know the context, because I might have been working on a project at one of my other properties with contractors. So that would have kept me pretty busy.
Okay.
And sometimes my renovations take weeks. And I will work with them in the daytime. They usually come in 7, 8 o'clock and they don't leave till 4 or 5 o'clock at night. And I'm there on site because I'm taking loads to the dump, or I'm picking up supplies, or I'm helping. bringing in flooring, maybe I'm helping them cut. Like, it depends on when that was and what I was doing at that time.
Okay.
Like, I'd have to, like, when was that? Like, when did she send that? Was it?
Well, yeah, I could look that up for you and
Appreciate that.
and
Then I would know
we
what
can-
project I was on.
we can do that. Let's see. So tab B. Let's see. Just a moment. It is in the materials. I just was sort of asking the question. It's just because I was going on to something else. Just let me continue my thought process. So my first question then was, you know, you've got a lot of properties, you've got a lot of things going on all the time, it sounds like. And I was just going to ask you, like, you know, it didn't seem like you could really make a few minutes to discuss on the phone about your business license. That's all. But let me just go. It's under, let's see, tab B, licensing evidence. Let's see. And I just had another question too. Sorry, I'm just flowing
Okay.
from Mr. Ellis's cross-exam of one of the witnesses. It was Julie. She was the inspector. She asked, or he asked about, was it easy to get a hold of you? So I've just put the question too, like, is it easy to get a hold of you? Can people call you and discuss things with you?
They can call me. I find myself getting back to people a lot because I can't answer the phone. Either I'm driving or I've got somebody in front of me and I can't interrupt a conversation, or like my phone's ringing right now and I'm not picking it up. I can feel it in my pocket.
Okay. Let me just look here. There's also a whole package. There's something listed here as whole package, and it's in that correspondence at the end here. Anyways, we can probably just we can probably just move on. It's in
Okay.
the information I've quoted where it was for you. So it is in there. It's in their tab B, the licensing materials. That's that. You also talked about the notice of the meeting, and you said that notice of this hearing, rather, when Mr. Ellis was asking you today, and you, I'll quote you, you said this was the way it was going to be. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Did Helen mail out a letter to you about anything regarding?
Mail a letter. I got the renewal of licensing. I got that mail.
You got the conditions letter?
Yes, I believe that was written because I think that I provided to Tim. There was maybe email or 2 or 3, not very many, because obviously I'm not really much on a radar.
Okay.
I think maybe 1 phone call in all the time that I've owned 249 Duke Street. I don't think it's been more than that.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so did Helen try to reach out to you in any other way that this was going to council in February of 2021?
No, just the email.
Okay, and so you don't remember communicating with Helen about this moving forward?
She already decided. I don't think there was any discussion with her at all. She had already decided she was going to do what she was going to do. And anything that I said didn't matter. And I got that impression. And I think that's probably the way it turned out. So,
Okay, so I remember now where that part was with where Helen couldn't get a hold of you. It was around the January 6th. It's the date around when she mailed out the letter with the conditions. You remember that letter, right?
I believe I had that letter, yes.
Yeah. And then she wanted to talk to you about that. So around January 7th, she emailed you and you said, like, she was trying to give you a time, like you were trying to arrange a time. And she said, she said, well, give me some times that maybe do you remember this at all? I'm just asking you. It's around January 7th. January 6th, 7th of this year.
Phone conversation or?
There's an email correspondence,
email.
correspondence.
All right.
And do you remember this at all?
Usually I read my emails at night when I get home. So it's easier for me to correspond via email at night.
Do you?
So like, what I'm trying to say is, did you make any attempts to communicate with Helen, the manager of licensing?
I believe I wrote her a letter explaining to her my situation. And I believe it was an email.
Okay.
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 Like, as I said, my hands are tied. Tribunal, waiting for court date, waiting. I couldn't do anything any faster. But as I said, with the dog issue, I was able to convince him that I had a better place for him, and he agreed to move. So I don't know if I could have done that any faster. When he was initially when he was to become a tenant, there was no dog. He didn't have one. That was a surprise that was foisted on me. I didn't know about it. And as soon as I realized it, and that the dog was definitely that rooming house is no place for a dog. And certainly not that dog. That dog needed a lot more than he was providing for it. That dog was obviously a puppy mill dog that needed one-on-one, and it wasn't getting at that. And with that revolving door at the front with room 5, the dog would get out, dog would break off its leash. Dog loved people, but did not like other animals.
Okay. Okay, I think that pretty much concludes my questions right now. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Muck. Mr. Ellis, would you like to redirect?
No, I have no redirect.
Okay, so we can, I guess, do summations now because we've got time. We've got till 5 o'clock today. So
I have all mine. I have mine in writing. If you'd like me to send them to the tribunal. I can
okay.
read them as well, but I can also give a written copy of them.
So I prepared an oral summation today, and I would like to proceed orally.
Okay. I'll read mine and then send it to the tribunal as well with the case law that I'm relying on.
Well,
Okay.
I won't be able to email my oral submissions because obviously they're different then. So I would in the sense that I write differently when I'm going to present orally versus a written factum, if you will. Like I write differently for those types of things. So I prepared an oral submission. That is my understanding of how things were going to proceed today.
See, and I thought it was going to be written from the way that we were talking at the last hearing because we didn't know whether or not we could fit in the timeline.
No, the committee did say that's why we adjourned it to this day, that there were there was continuation of your.
I can read I can read the 8 pages that I have.
Yeah, Mr. Ellis, I appreciate you writing it out too. I think Ms. Mugg is right. We were, if we had time, we were doing the oral submissions. If not, we would, for the sake of timing, we would have written one. So we'll just go ahead and do the oral one if that's okay with you. Okay.
That's fine with me.
All right. So, Mr. Ellis, would you like to go first? Or
shouldn't the city be going first? It's
okay, sure. Sorry, I'm my apologies. Okay, Aaron, yes.
Okay. So this committee was called according to Chapter 553 of the Municipal Code to hear facts and evidence about whether or not to revoke a license for this lodging house at 249 Duke Street East. The committee may grant a license beyond June 30th, 2021, grant a license with conditions, suspend the license or revoke it. And this is all in accordance with this chapter of the Municipal Code. First, I'd like to tell you a bit about city staff's position. It's city staff position that the business license be revoked. You've heard evidence from the manager of licensing, the licensing inspector, the bylaw enforcement officer. You've heard evidence that several conditions were placed on Ms. Tamber's lodging house license since January of this year. These witnesses showed you that Ms. Tamber bought the property in December of 2015 and that it remained unlicensed until the licensing inspector began to inspect again in August of 2019. The lodging house was licensed prior to Ms. Tamber's purchase of the property, and so she ought to have known to get a business license from the city. You've also heard from the licensing inspector when she was asked a question from Mr. Ellis, Ms. Tamber, was Ms. Tamber easy to connect with? And the answer was no. And this was demonstrated by the fact that after 6 months from the inspection date in August of 2019, that Ms. Tamber finally completed her application and it was issued a license in May of 2020. But before I continue about the evidence, I want to talk about what does it mean to revoke this license? The definition is contained in Chapter 553 of the city's municipal code. And by definition, a lodging house is a dwelling or part of a dwelling containing one or more lodging units. And these lodging units are designed to accommodate 4 or more residents. So I put my emphasis on 4 or more. So if you decide today to revoke the license, it does not mean that all the tenants will lose their homes. You've heard from a tenant who has lived there for 19 years. That was evidence brought forward by Mr. Ellis. He does not have to be displaced by revoking this license because Ms. Tamber can have 3 residents in 249 Duke Street East and be unlicensed. And at the end of Ms. Tamber's witness statement, she sort of said, like, I want to keep my license because it makes me conform to safety codes, makes me conform to property standards. Actually, it doesn't matter if Ms. Tamber's house is licensed as a lodging house because the fire code, the property standards bylaw, they all apply to her house anyway. Fire code and property standards bylaws apply to all properties in the city. It's possible that only a few tenants who have only recently moved in will need to find other homes. You heard that one tenant was evicted in June 2021 and another one left or was moved after being involved in the February SWAT investigation. Ms. Tamber read in her witness statement, and she says that there are several tenants who just moved in this year, and perhaps with just 3 tenants, Ms. Tamber can actually control the property and control the state of the property a bit better. This would also lessen the strain on the community. And it's apparent from her witness statement and her testimony that some tenants do move around quite frequently as she moves them around to different properties. So Ms. Tamber will still be receiving some income from the property if that is your decision today. Now, returning back to some of the other evidence, you've heard that the manager of licensing solicits comments from neighboring properties within 60 meters of the lodging house. You've heard from the manager that 249 Duke Street has received 77 calls for service from 2015 until the current date. And that was when the Miss Tamber took ownership. And Miss Tamber would like you to believe that she made some of those calls to the police trying to get trespassers off her property. But you've also heard from another neighbor to that property that he called anywhere between 3 and 50 times, and that was just one other neighbor. There are other neighbors, Amanda Reed, for example, she explained that the police were in her driveway for 2 weeks, staking out the property at 249 Duke Street East. There's evidence of police presence too, with the article from the Record about weapons and drugs bust in February of this year. You've heard that the managers state that there are 18 lodging houses in the city of Kitchener. And most of those houses get a few complaints. They're the only other lodging house that had their license revoked, had 49 calls for service in a similar time frame. What this case really comes down to is 249 Duke Street East a safe place for everyone? It doesn't seem to be a safe place for at least one tenant who died after living at the property for 66 days. Again, this is in her witness statement, Ms. Tamber's witness statement. She read that to the committee. It doesn't seem safe because the landlord herself has stated that in her witness statement, she says she had left a pickaxe and an axe at the property that you see in that article of the Record regarding the SWAT team investigation. If some of those tenants are vulnerable and possibly drug addicted, then why is Ms. Tamber leaving some of these tools that could cause harm to her tenants? So good management of a building is a place where people feel safe. You've heard the evidence from the neighbors who are solicited to give comments. You've also heard one neighbor provide some information about how she's not opposed to a lodging house. She understands that vulnerable people need affordable housing. She stated that there are some people affiliated with this property that are nice and chatty. She wants tenants to be safe too. And she said to you, this isn't a place where someone can get better. But you've heard that several neighbors state that they do not feel safe to be in their front yard. They don't let their children play outside. They don't sit on their front porch or let their children walk alone to school because they don't know if there'll be an incident with an individual. You heard one neighbor say that her own son does not live with her anymore because she didn't feel it was safe for him. So it's not safe for a son to live with her mother. And this is all related to 249 Duke Street East. The property at 249 Duke Street East is a lodging house, and it has had detrimental effects on the community around it. I asked Ms. Tamber today about what she thought reasonable enjoyment was, and she talked about noise and city's bylaw about noise. But I think that a landlord also should be providing safe and adequate housing to tenants while also ensuring the comfort and well-being of the neighbors. If a lodging house is going to provide housing for those with issues of drug addiction issues or other issues, then the landlord should provide adequate support and ensure for their well-being, and also ensure the reasonable enjoyment of the neighbors. Sure, COVID was a catalyst, perhaps, but it wasn't the problem or the problem in this case. You also heard from the manager of licensing earlier in her testimony when she said that she'd be happy to work with Ms. Tamber. And that was when Mr. Ellis put it to her that, I think he was talking about house rules. He put it to her like, can you sort of communicate with Ms. Tamber? In the alternative, the committee may not want to revoke the license, but instead grant a license with conditions. Now, several conditions have already been placed upon Ms. Tamber since January 2021. These conditions have not been met, But the city would ask that if the committee adds more conditions to the license, that they be the following. Reduce the number of people licensed in the building to just 4, so 4 tenants. This would mean that none of the long-term tenants will be displaced. Continue with some of these other conditions here. So create and post house rules, ensure on-site person adheres to all conditions. Perhaps in working with the house rules, as Helen has offered to do, that maybe there's no guests should maybe be included on the house rules instead of guests with permission. Mr. Ellis put forward documentation about eviction, stating that the problem tenant is gone now. He's definitely also arguing that some other tenants are not the problem, but it's their guests. And he's saying that she has no control over these guests. So maybe there are some other tactics that she can try. I don't think it's worth just saying, oh, I can't enforce it under the Residential Tenancies Act, so therefore we can't do anything about it. Maybe there are some other options here. Ensure that the tenants are aware of the license conditions and the house rules. Keep the front door closed and ensure compliance with the city's noise bylaw. Ensure continual maintenance of the property. These are more conditions that I'm speaking about. So it was ensure tenants are aware of the license condition and house rules. Keep the front door closed and ensure compliance with the city's noise bylaw. Ensure continual maintenance of the property and home in accordance with the city's property standards and lot maintenance bylaw, animal control bylaws, as well as the building code, criminal code, and fire code. Ensure that there is proper needle disposal location. No accessory units are to be erected on the property that are not in accordance with the city's zoning bylaw. Also, we ask that a condition be that hiring a property management company that Ms. Ann Tamber is not affiliated with. And perhaps in your recommendation to council, you can include a recommendation to delegate some authority to the manager of licensing so that she has the ability to revoke the license if Ms. Tamber does not in the future meet these conditions. A possible deadline to review these conditions could be 6 months from now, around February 1st, 2021, or at such time as the committee decides. And making your decision, please note that the character evidence Mr. Ellis submitted through the share file with the 22 witness statements about Ms. Tamber's character is inadmissible. Similarly, that you cannot look to the witness statements from the city from Tom Ruggles or Steve Renzos, as they did not testify. That was brought in only response to the character statements, which were not admitted as evidence. Furthermore, under the Residential Tenancies Act, Mr. Ellis asked a question of the manager of licensing that under the RTA, you can't enforce a tenant to be an on-site superintendent. I don't think that's the case. And again, within the city of Kitchener's chapter 553, I mentioned that section and I put it to Anne and I said to her, are you aware that you should have an on-site contact, someone who can contact? The RTA does not speak to someone becoming a superintendent. It really only addresses what happens when an on-site superintendent is fired. So to say that the RTA specifically prohibits having an on-site superintendent would probably be, in my opinion, incorrect. And I submit to you that it's in our chapter 553. It's one of our licensing requirements. I do have one case to mention. Well, maybe I'll mention 2 cases. So there is a case, London Property Management Association v. the City of London, and the case citation is 2011 ONSC 4710. And at paragraph 62, it's talking a bit about the licensing bylaw with respect to the City of London, but it says that the licensing bylaw contains no provisions which are to evict tenants. And in that case, it talks about, I disagree. This is what I'm reading, I'm quoting here. I disagree with the applicant's submission that the licensing bylaw creates a new ground for termination of a tenancy not found in the Residential Tenancies Act. The penalty for failing to comply with the licensing bylaw is the potential of a fine or finding of contempt. So I just want to make the committee aware that by not complying with some licensing provisions, there are other penalties that can be imposed through court processes. But I think it's already come up in this hearing that the licensing bylaw doesn't make people be evicted in that sense. And I talked about, again, that we're talking about 4 or more tenants. And if she has 3 tenants, she doesn't have to evict anyone, but she doesn't require a license. So that's just want to make quick mention of that. The second case I'd like to briefly quote some things from is Fodor, it's Fodor, v. North Bay City. The case citation is 2018 ONSC 3722. At paragraph 59, I quote, the applicant argues that the bylaw is inconsistent with the RTA because a landlord may lose his or her license under the bylaw, yet be unable to evict tenants under the RTA. It is said that this creates an impossible situation for a landlord who is on one hand not authorized to rent to tenants and on the other hand unable to evict tenants. This is something about a false dichotomy. The enactments do not conflict. They are concerned with different rights and different relationships. The RTA is concerned with the rights of tenants and the regulation of relationships between tenants and landlords. It provides in section 1 of the RTA that its purposes are to provide protection for residential tenants from unlawful rent increases and unlawful evictions, to establish a framework for the regulation of residential tenants, to balance the rights and responsibilities of residential landlords and tenants, and to provide for the adjudication of disputes and for the other processes to informally resolve disputes. At paragraph 61, it says, by way of contrast, the bylaw is concerned with the rights and responsibility of landlords and their relationships with the city. And in this case at Bar, we have the same situation. This is a city's licensing bylaw. It's concerned with the rights and responsibilities of landlords and their relationship with the city. I further quote that the licensing under the bylaw is designated to ensure that buildings rented to tenants meet certain minimum specifications. End quote at paragraph 61. And that's ultimately the goal of the city. It's to ensure that there's some minimum standards. Property standards, for instance, is a minimum standard. And perhaps, no guests should have been coming during COVID, during this time to this property anyways. But property standards is a minimum standard that applies to everything in the city. And similarly, this licensing bylaw contains standards that lodging houses should abide by when they are licensed. And ultimately, it's the owner of the property who's responsible. So Ms. Tamber, it is my submission that she somewhat deviates from the minimum standards and a reasonable standard of care, in that she needs to take control of what happens at her property. She needs to be responsible with what happens at her properties. So those are my submissions. I've given 2 options. The first option is to revoke, and the second option is, in the alternative, to provide more conditions to this license. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muck. Mr. Ellis?
Yes, I would like to start by discussing some of the submissions of the city solicitor in the attempt to have my client enforce city bylaws that supersede a provincial act. A municipal act cannot supersede a provincial act. A provincial act is the Residential Tenancies Act. The Residential Tenancies Act states that you cannot instruct a tenant whether or not they can have guests. You cannot tell a tenant that they cannot have guests after 11 o'clock. You cannot tell a tenant that he must keep the front door closed. There was a discussion from the city solicitor in her submissions regarding the fact that my client needs to make sure that the tenants abide by all noise bylaws. There has been no evidence given to this panel that anybody from 249 Duke Street East has ever been charged for a noise bylaw by the city. There is no evidence been put forward by the city in their witnesses that states that anybody has been charged by any police that were tenants of the unit. There was evidence put forward about a SWAT team that showed up for a tenant that had moved out a week and a half before. There has been no evidence that my client has not abided by the law. There is evidence, or there is submissions by city solicitor that my client's license should be revoked because she has not complied by any of the rules that have been put forward. But there's been no discussion as to what rules she has broken. She's put up house rules. She's put up the needle boxes. She has done her best to evict as quickly as she possibly could through the Residential Tenancies Act. During the COVID lockdown, even the police couldn't stop people from having guests over. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been so many charges for people having too many guests during the lockdown. There is so much power that a landlord or the police or bylaw do not have because the tenants are afforded so many rights under the Residential Tenancies Act. Ms. Tamber has done her best to try to resolve any issues that have been brought to her attention. When bylaw came regarding the fence, there was no fine given to Ms. Tamber. They gave her time to remove the fence, she removed the fence. When they showed up in regards to the dog, she had the dog moved somewhere else. When they showed up in regards to the trailer was moved. There is a certain portion that I understand that a landlord is responsible to take care of a property, and they're responsible to try and make the tenants have a reasonable enjoyment and the neighbors have a reasonable enjoyment. But there is also a premise behind the fact that when a landlord only has certain rights and is not living at this unit, that there's only so much she can do proactively, but she cannot control humans. She cannot control human behavior. And human behavior, the city solicitor in her submission says that she doesn't feel that COVID has caused any extra disturbance in this premise, that this property was just as bad before COVID as after. I tend to disagree, and I believe that the evidence that the tribunal has heard definitely talks on the factor that COVID has definitely caused a disruption in this neighborhood, such as the SWAT showing up, such as the extra noise complaints, and the tenants being cooped up inside of that unit. It is our submissions that Ms. Tamber has held a license in there since 2000. The city says 2020, but she applied in 2019. It was granted in 2020. It was then offered to renew in 2021. The city was aware of the situation at this unit. This isn't the first license that's been at this unit. There was a lodging license before this unit. Somebody died from a stabbing at this unit while there was a lodging license, but there was no evidence given to this tribunal that they made any attempt to remove the lodging license from the previous landlord, just from Ms. Tamber. That the issues and complaints relied upon by the city in respect to their denial right now of renewing the lodging license for Ms. Tamber, it is suggested that the city has been an active participant in the growth and health of its community, knew or ought to have been aware of the conditions in that neighborhood. The city is at all times during the licensing of the lodging house prior to Ms. Tamber purchasing aware of the nature of the location, the social issues, the housing issues, the policing issues. There was no evidence brought forward whether or not the police were ever at the unit before. There was only evidence brought that there was 77 calls, but there was no evidence given to this tribunal that anybody was ever charged from these calls or what these calls were in relation to. Were some of them in relation to health issues? Was there some that were in relation to criminal issues? There was no evidence brought forward to this tribunal to deal with these apparent 77 calls. All there was testimony that there was 77 calls to this location by the police. That's a lot of calls for nobody ever being charged. The city is aware of the ongoing criminal activity in this area. This is not the only property. I know that it's been alleged in the submissions of the city solicitor, but that this is the only property in that neighborhood that has had any issues with criminal activity. That is not true. The city required a needle disposal, which is clear and obvious that the city is aware of the drug use issues in this neighborhood. The city was specifically advised of the type of behavior and criminal conduct being relied upon to deny Ms. Tamber her license renewal prior to the past renewals. They were aware of all these conditions before they offered the renewal in 2021. The evidence by the testimony of their own witnesses that have all substantially testified to providing such information and reports to the licensing department prior to the regular license renewal when they originally gave Ms. Tamber her license. They stated that they knew about these conditions before they gave her original license in 2020. That despite being provided and fully aware of the issues and type of incidences now relied upon to refuse Ms. Tamber renewal, has in prior years renewed the said license with basic conditions not only for Ms. Tamber, but its past operators. Ms. Tamber has met the licensing requirements by the city since taking ownership of the premises, including but not limited to completing the required inspections, posting rules as required, and providing the needle disposal. Ms. Tamber has worked diligently to remove problem residents personally subject to the Residential Tenancies Act, which sets out the procedures and requirements for terminating tenancies, and has reached a point where the last problem resident has now been evicted as of June. There has been no testimony that there's been problems at this property since June 25th when that tenant has been removed. That given the requirements of the RTA, the right of tenants to dispute termination of their tenancy, if there are not proper grounds, or even if there is, and the pandemic-related backlog delays, it will be months, if not years, before the subject tenancies and occupancy of the premises could be obtained, should the tribunal decide that they're going to revoke the license of Ms. Tamber. That the eviction of the tenancies will not change the character of the community, increase public health or safety, and may give the testimony heard to the problems by making some tenants homeless, not doing anything to stem the criminal activity in the area or move the existing drug use onto the streets. It's our submissions that this is an estoppel. I've been advised by my friend in our preparation for this hearing that the rules, procedures, and law applicable before the Licensing Appeals Tribunal often differ from those of the general courts, in which I'm used to appearing more than at tribunals, which is of course correct. However, despite the divergence in application, I would submit that there are some aspects of the law that not only are similar, but strictly applicable. One of those is the concept of estoppel, which is a fancy Latin term that means you cannot suggest, state, or promise something by words or conduct, such as giving a license and offering a renewal for a license for a further year, and then change your mind after someone relies on your words or past conduct. The case that I'm relying on for this is from the Supreme Court of Canada and has illustrated these principles in the case of John Burroughs Limited versus Subsurface Surveys Limited, 1968, which states, since the decision of the present Lord, and I can read, this will be 3 pages of paragraphs from this case. You might want, I don't know whether you want to just review this case, whether you would like me to send you the submission so I don't spend an hour and a half reading the pages for this. I can send you the paragraphs from this case instead.
Thank you. If you would, Mr. Ellis, thank you.
So this is the Supreme Court of Canada case that I plan on relying upon the estoppel of the fact that the city was well aware of the issues at this property and provided a license and then offered a renewal of a license, and then now under the exact same premises of how they gave the license, now wants to revoke the license. The conduct of the city in granting past licenses by word or conduct created the shared assumption that the complaints and issues now raised were not at bar to barring her license. It is further submitted that it is clearly unfair for the city to now utilize factors of which it was fully aware to deny the license of Ms. Tamber could and would suffer general and paradox detriment as follows. Loss of all funds utilized to meet the requirements of a lodging house. If she has to go down to only 3 tenants, it will barely cover the mortgage on the property, if it even covers the mortgage on the property. So financially, this will hurt Ms. Tamber for this property. Number 2, tenants that she cannot evict without costly procedures pursuant to the Residential Tenancies Act. If her license is revoked and should, as the submissions of the solicitor put her down to 3 tenants, she still has to get rid of 3 tenants. And she has to have a reasonable excuse with the RTA as to why to get rid of these 3 tenants. She can't just say the city decided that they don't want these 3 tenants, so the board has to evict. There's nothing in the RTA that says that the board can evict under those premises. Number 3, the tenants that she cannot technically charge rent, as she would then be subject to fines for operating a lodging house without a license. So she'd either have to allow those 3 tenants to just live there for free and not make them tenants, or she'd have to deal with the fact of the courts dealing with the fact of illegally evicting these tenants. Number 4, expenses, costs, and obligations that would still have to be filled in respect to the existing tenants pursuant to the obligations contained in the RTA. She's still got to maintain this property. She's still got to pay the mortgage. She can't just stop paying everything because she no longer can charge enough money in order to be able to cover the operating costs of this property. In summary, it is submitted that the relationship between the parties and the facts herein establish that the city is and was stopped by denying Ms. Tamber the requested lodging house license. The next premise that I want to go on is public interest in community health and safety. It is submitted that the issue of public interest in community health and safety are to the large extent questions of fact. But even so, these determinations of fact must be reasonable and reflect the rights of the prospective licensees and the mandate of the community as a whole. In the matter presented at issue, it is suggested that the relevant considerations are as follows. A, it is not the lodging house that is the source of the problem, only the location. B, that while the testimony as to potential criminal activity from the neighbors indicates that it exists, is anecdotal, to a large extent unsupported by independent corroboration evidence and subject to personal bias without proof of objective impact of consequence. There's been no proof that there's prostitution going out of that property. There's no proof of drug dealing going out of that property. Nobody's been charged. There's been testimony that they believe that because of the behavior that there's criminal activity, but there's been no proof given that there's criminal activity. That the correspondent evidence for the arrests for drugs and weapons occurred inside the room of a tenant and as such constitute conduct unknown to Ms. Tamber and beyond her legal right to control or monitor pursuant to the provisions of the RTA. Number 4, as per the evidence provided by the licensee, works with community organizations and provides housing to those that may otherwise just be on the streets of Kitchener. 5, that the licensee has and is taking proactive steps to attempt to vet her tenants, and as such, over the past years has managed to terminate the tenancies of problem tenants with the last hearing for the last problem and the eviction on June 25th. 6, that as indicated in the testimony herein, the community in which the lodging house situated has a history of and presently exhibits generally the social and economic problems that will remain with or without the existence of Ms. Tamber's lodging house. 7, it is probable that the occupants, when and if they can be evicted from the premises, will be forced to live on the streets or find alternative accommodations in the area, thereby simply moving the problem and or exasperating the existing problems without providing a resolution to the problem. Number 8, that the obvious solution to the problems being relied on as a danger or impediment to public safety and as to grounds for the refusal to renew the existing license lie not with the removal of the lodging house, but with the increased social programs, increased mental health and additional intervention and increased and issues sensitive policing, all of which lie within the purview of the city, not with Ms. Tamber. While there does not appear to be any specific case law related to the above cited issues, it should be noted that the courts have taken the position that similar or worse establishments are of importance to the community, the safety of its residents, and the betterment of society as a whole. This position is disclosed in the case of Canada Attorney General versus Bedford, 2012, Ontario Court of Appeal. Again, the paragraphs from that will be in my submissions that I will send to the board. It should be noted that the above cited case outlined two factors that must be considered in the consideration of the matter being heard. A, the importance of this type of accommodation for those economically disadvantaged. And B, the fact that the inherent priority in city licensing is the safety of the tenants. It is submitted that in summary, it is submitted that in addition to the estoppel issue outlined above, the city has not established and or sufficiently established that the subject lodging house creates or supports any threat to the public or community health and safety, and further that both practically speaking and in the general opinion of the courts, the availability of this type of accommodation is not only important to the community, but its loss can exacerbate the problems alleged as being caused by it. The last situation that I'm bringing to the tribunal's attention is human rights. It should be further noted that the consequences of the refusal of the license to license the subject lodging house and potentially displace its tenants based on the allegations, supposition, or presumption that they have drug problems and are criminals could, even though the refusal to the license as was directed to Ms. Tamber, raising the issue that the city has breached their human rights. The potential breach of the code and its application to the facts herein arise from, but not limited to, sections 1, 2, 9, and 12, which state, number 1, services. Every person has a right to equal treatment with respect to services, goods, and facilities without discrimination based because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, marital status, family status, or their disability. Number 2, accommodations. Every person has the right to equal treatment with respect to the occupancy of accommodations without discrimination because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, marital status, family status, disability, or the receipt of public assistance. Number 9, infringement prohibited. No person shall infringe or do directly or indirectly anything that infringes a right under this part of the Act. Number 12, discrimination because of association. A right under Part 1 is infringement where the discrimination is because of relationship, association, or dealing with a person or persons identified by a prohibited ground of discrimination. It is submitted that the refusal to renew Ms. Tamber's license on the grounds alleged and specifically based on the complaints and the allegations of the neighbors constitutes discrimination against Ms. Tamber due to her association with her tenants and indirectly against her tenants by way of their disabilities arising from drug dependencies known and acknowledged by the city and or their mental illness. In conclusion, it is submitted that the refusal to renew Ms. Tamber's lodging license is stopped by the conduct of the city without foundation or grounds and constitutes an infringement of her human rights and indirectly those of her tenants, and as such, the renewal of the said license should and must be granted. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Ms. Mock, would you like to reply?
Just a few points through the chair. Mr. Ellis had mentioned that there was no evidence of anybody being arrested, and that's correct in a sense that there is no police evidence. We don't have anyone from the police who provided testimony to you about anything about someone being charged with. And so the fact that there isn't any evidence before you doesn't mean that someone hasn't been arrested, because we don't know that, because there's been no evidence brought forward by the police for that. So just on that point, it doesn't mean that nobody's been charged. And in addition, Mr. Ellis spoke about that this would, reducing the number of tenants would financially hurt her. There has been nothing brought forward by Mr. Ellis. He never asked Ms. Tamber in chief, never asked her about how is this going to affect you? How would this affect you if the lodging house was completely shut down, or if it was, he could have asked her that question. He didn't. He's just put this into his submissions like you're going to accept that as evidence. There's really no evidence about her finances. We didn't talk about her other properties that she owns. We didn't talk about how much money a tenant pays her for rent, what her mortgage is. We didn't talk about any of that. That was not put into evidence. So I don't think that his submission in that respect can be accepted as a fact. And I think that the city of Kitchener has respectfully submitted 2 options. And I just ask that the committee consider the evidence, consider what was put before you in oral testimony, as well as the materials, the admissible materials that were put forward through share file. And I just ask that the committee make the decision accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mock, and thank you, Mr. Illis, and everyone for attending today. At this time, we're going to conclude the hearing, and Councillor Gazzola and I will deliberate, and we will be providing a written decision.
I will email Diane the case law submissions for you.
Thanks, Mr. Ellis. I appreciate it.
If the committee will, and if we are going to do deliberation at this moment, I will remove everybody from the meeting and let you know when the live stream has concluded.